Hello. So, thanks for coming along, Merijn. It's been a while. We've been talking about getting together to do a little conversation, a little discussion on the industry. And I guess this is the beginning of what's going to be maybe a couple of videos throughout the year we're going to do together, just to kind of get different sides of a perspective on event tech today. And we're kicking off with this video, which is going to be just a really free-form discussion around the summer of pivots. You know, lots of change in the industry. Really keen to get your perspective on it, share some thoughts, and hopefully strike up some interesting conversation.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to this chat, Nick. Thank you so much for having me. I think indeed there will be a few episodes coming. So for those listening and watching, definitely keep your eyes out. And let's dive right in. Let's go into the good stuff.
All right. Sounds good. Let's do it. So yeah, summer of pivots. So there's been a huge amount of change in the industry. Obviously, everyone knows we're coming out of this, I guess, what I would say is a very bubbled up market, you know, in terms of the event tech players out there. There was a huge amount of speculation off the back of the sort of virtual craze, which was really driven by the COVID pandemic and a sort of inability to go face to face. And what we're seeing now is a sensible readjustment in the market where, you know, a lot of event managers out there are going back to what they do best, which is, you know, really engaging in-person events. And so event tech players who had an in-person presence went virtual are now sort of shifting back. The pendulum swung. And so there's been a huge refocusing of attention on that sort of in-person, and that's caused, I guess, a lot of turmoil in the market. I mean, what have you seen, Merijn?
Well, obviously this summer we've seen quite a few jaw-dropping announcements, so to speak. I think we all know who we're talking about, and it was inevitable. Like if you looked at the virtual hype during the pandemic, knowing that everything slowly was opening up, it was inevitable that people wanted to go back to in-person, and where there's less demand for, in this case, completely virtual, there's going to be a shift. And now I think we're a year into really being open and being back, a little bit longer. Now that you see the actual results of that, and companies that went in a little bit too hard on banking on going completely virtual, especially those that just got started during the pandemic that hadn't already have a huge track record before that. Yeah, they're having a hard time at the moment. And that's something both on, you mentioned the pivot to more in person. It's something you see both with event professionals, but also with the event technology itself in terms of where they're currently putting all their focus. But there, I want to put a small point there, like they have to be careful because the pendulum, as you say, it's swinging and it will eventually also start to go back a little bit. We will end up somewhere in the middle, but it's pretty evident as well that you see still companies that embrace virtual and hybrid solutions. So completely going only in person, I would be very hesitant about that, but it is something we see a lot at the moment, both on the event professional side as on the event tech side.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, there's obviously a clear place in the market for virtual and especially hybrid solutions out there, and there's some great technology built during the pandemic. You know, there's no doubt about that. But I guess, you know, the market at the minute is sort of leaning more towards, right, how can we make our in-person experiences better? And I think I use the word experiences because it's really clear that there's been a shift, not just since 2020, but for the past sort of 5 or so years, to experience kind of driving the event experience. You know, and by experience, I mean putting on a bit of a show, creating a wow moment, creating something that's memorable, because, you know, there's a lot of players in the organizer market putting on great events and amazing locations around the world. So the bar is always going up and up and up in terms of what people expect. You're getting, and I talk from a sort of B2B perspective, right? Because I gather we do a lot of B2B events, but our B2B events are starting to feel much more like B2C kind of brand experience events, which is really interesting, you know. And so the technology, which has traditionally been a lot more sort of functional, maybe a bit more sort of back office organizational tools, just the nuts and bolts of making an event happen, has had to adapt and evolve with that. And so I think you're seeing a bit of a delta in terms of the expectations of attendees at events and what we're able to deliver at the minute, which is, people are crying out for something a bit different, a bit new, but there's still lots of room to kind of actually create that experience for people.
Oh, absolutely. And I think also during those 2.5, 3 years where we couldn't do in person, it was only accelerated because we wanted to do, as event professionals, you wanted to do as much as possible to make sure that people actually showed up to your event. It was all new. You really had to reinvent the wheel, and therefore you came up with very creative solutions. And you had to listen very closely to your audience to make sure you had something that captivated their attention, that really kept them engaged. And because we tailored to our audiences in such a new way, then when we're coming back to in person now, that expectation is still there, that we overachieve, we deliver crazy experiences to really wow the audience, which has already been the case, as you mentioned, for a longer period of time. But yeah, we really doubled down on it during those 3 years where we couldn't do a lot and we had to really be creative. And now that is the new expectation in terms of experience. Obviously, it helps that the new generation is entering the market as well, who are all experience first. It was already the case. Like more and more, it became a standard, not just for events, but also in general. People want to get experiences. They don't want to buy that super fancy car. Well, they probably still want to, but they rather spend it on an experience that lasts them a lifetime rather than a one-time purchase. So that has been a trend, and that only got accelerated during those more or less 3 years where we had to reinvent, had to be creative, and that's now the new expectation.
Yeah, and I like just to throw some examples out there, because I think it's good to kind of be concrete in terms of what we're talking about. So a couple of things I've noticed just in the last couple of weeks whilst I've been thinking about this chat. One which is not sort of necessarily B2B events related at all, but I was trying to book a ticket for an exhibition at the Tate in London. And this was like a Japanese artist, and it was one of these kind of audio-visual kind of immersive experiences with like mirrors and lights and sound and all that sort of stuff, like what TeamLab kind of like really sort of pioneered, I guess, back in the day. And you cannot buy tickets for this thing. And it's a Tate, it's a free exhibition, but you cannot buy tickets. And, this goes back to this point around experience. Like everyone who's going to that experience is there to take a picture. They're there to take a selfie and to kind of capture that moment, share it on Instagram, and tell everyone about it, that they've been there because they've seen, this kind of amazing marketing machine at work where thousands of attendees are taking these cool shots, so they want to be a part of that too. And again, that's been a B2B, a B2C sort of model for a long time. But if you look at LinkedIn with the rise of the personal brand, of LinkedIn influencers, of business influencers, whether they're there to do thought leadership work, whether they're just to kind of build a sort of a cult of personality, and there's a big increase on both sides of that market, even in our little industry. This idea of having content that draws eyeballs to you specifically, not just the company you work for, you specifically, is massive, And so just to finish off the example, you take that Tate example. We were at the Meeting Show recently over in London, and we were exhibiting there. And one of the booths next to us it was the Odeon Cinemas booth, I think. They had the Barbie photo booth. Which is like, I think if people have seen, it's like this big Barbie kind of box, and you can stand inside it with a couple of people, and you get like a nice sort of picture taken. That was by far and away the most popular thing at that whole event, which is by and large a travel event, right? Travel and venues. And everyone was just queuing up for the Barbie experience because they wanted that picture.
Yep.
And LinkedIn was full of Barbie shots. So it really goes to show that has a huge impact on the sort of post-event marketing, the post-event buzz you're able to drive.
Yeah, it's very essential, and in that regards, the age of social media that we're in, it really helped to accelerate that part as well. Like people love to show how amazing of an experience they had. Want to get everyone a little bit of FOMO here and there, and that only, as you said, it excels the reach of the event or the experience outside of the event as well. And it's funny because you mentioned a few times that like business to business is pivoting much more towards business to consumer, or has a lot of common ground there. And it's something, yeah, you see pretty much everywhere, not just in the event industry, but also in marketing in general, how people approach or how companies approach a business to business strategy at this point. It's a lot more making sure that the people behind that company, because you're doing business to business, but you're still doing business with a person from that company. It's a lot more personal, and that is something we're only going to see more and more of, up until a point where there will be a pendulum shifting the other way again. I think everything in life is kind of ups and downs, but at the moment, yeah, making it as personal as possible and being sure that people can express themselves and feel seen. Storytelling is a big one, and if you can incorporate that in your events, that's what really drives the needle at this point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that's, I mean, so I come from a film and TV kind of broadcast background, digital media agency background. And, you know, the conversations we were having in the 2010s were all about branded content. You know, your storytelling, you're talking about a brand sort of indirectly by showcasing this kind of emotional story, by showcasing something which is going to resonate with audiences. And in the process of doing that, then you're building sort of your brand value, I guess. And that sort of flowed through to then starting to go from what used to be a boring corporate video where you'd talk to some execs and then you would learn about the product and that would be your corporate video. And it was very functional, but not very exciting. Then you started to say, no, we're going to hero this faceless engineer who's fixing this critical system, and that's your like hero of this story, and that character represents your brand. You know, so that shift obviously is what starts to turn B2B content, which can, you know, ostensibly quite dry, into something which is much more engaging, has an emotional reaction, resonates with people on a personal level, because like people do business with people. You know, if you're not talking to people on that level, then you're going to struggle. You know, if you just talk about solutions, products, features, that's fine. But that's only half the equation. You know, there's a lot of companies out there with solutions, a lot of companies out there with features. You know, what's your point of difference? Why would I want to do business with you? Why would I want to attend your event? So in a similar way to how you had storytelling sort of driving a lot of video production work and telling sort of corporate stories and bringing brands to life and bringing product to life, I think we're seeing that inside corporate events too, which used to be sort of very functional. You know, we're having some meetings and we're doing sales, and now is much more of a sort of show, a bit of more of a song and dance. So you're like heavily engaged in lots of different event tech players and loads of different brands for Event Mender. What kind of general trends are you seeing, you know, coming out of this pivot? You know, what are brands saying? What are event tech players saying?
So I've been advocating for this for a while, but we're finally seeing more and more event tech companies focus on one specific part of the market rather than we're the tool for everyone doing everything. And I think that's a very enlightening trend that we're seeing. It's obviously driven by the fact that, as you said, some platforms are consolidating, some are leaving the market. And that means that the more specific you can target an audience, the more you can incorporate, for instance, storytelling or making it more relevant to a specific part of an industry, the better that is for your product. So niching down in that sense to actually grow your brand. Like some people would think that if you niche down, you actually reach less people. But in essence, if you can convert all of the people in that specific niche rather than only a handful in the whole market, then you're actually doing a very good job. So that's something we're seeing on the event tech side. For the event professionals, what we're seeing is that after a lot of struggle and figuring out, doing research, pretty much failing here and there, but learning a lot from those moments where things didn't go as planned. They now have a much clearer idea in terms of what they actually need. And that also helps that platforms are being more specific in who they're targeting and what they're actually doing other than the others. Is that now event professionals know a lot better what they're actually looking for. And that makes that, well, we help them make those matches. That is easier done when you have someone who's looking for something very specifically, and you have someone who's really targeting that specific use case, rather than you have someone who doesn't really know what they're looking for, and every platform does everything. So what would be the match? So in that regards, the research process and finding the tools are becoming easier for event professionals. Definitely not for everyone, but those that have really experimented a lot and tried a lot, they now know, okay, this is exactly what I need and this is absolutely what I don't need, because of the experience that they had in those past few years. So I think that's both very good trends in terms of knowing what you want and sticking to your strengths on both sides.
I'm with you completely. Like this, I even got a little note up here on my screen. I was saying smaller businesses are doing better because they're more targeted and they're closer to their customers. You know, if you're a Goliath in the event tech industry and you do everything, and you've got loads of clients, great, good for you. But those clients individually are not going to get much face time. They're going to be a number on a piece of paper. You're going to have a customer success manager who's got 100 accounts, and that's not how you actually build value for customers. You know, and you also don't want to force people to use every single tool under the sun that you have. You've got to offer a more sort of flexible, tailored service to fill the gap that the customer wants you to fill, not just say, you know, throw everything out, throw your whole pipeline, the whole process, your whole workflow out, and just use us. That's not realistic, you know, and that's not how people want to work.
Most of the time it is, and then so that's kind of the main trend I'm seeing. But I'm curious, like you're also talking to a lot of event professionals. What are trends you're seeing at the moment?
That's a great question. So, I mean, we deal with two sides of the market. We deal with agencies who are, you know, creative agencies putting on events for brands, typically larger events for big global sort of players. And then we'll deal with the sort of direct brands as well. From an agency perspective, I think people want that flexibility. You know, they want to be able to differentiate themselves in the market from other agencies. If everyone's got the same stuff in their presentations and their pitches, you know, where's the value? So to have the ability to say you've got something that's truly tailored, truly white labeled, not just like a logo in a corner, I think that's kind of crucial for them. Because if you look at the trade show world, if you're dealing with a stand which might cost a brand a couple of million quid to actually build, why are you going to then skimp and to an incredible sort of high quality level? Why would you then skimp on having like a Teams-like platform which is the same as everything else that is out there and just unmemorable? You know, so I think that is what a lot of those agencies are looking for. And you're seeing increasingly a lot of agencies who are looking to sort of expand their digital capabilities. And with that, you know, comes this idea that by offering more to their clients, they can snap up more revenue for their accounts. So they're increasingly looking at the logistics side of things. They're increasingly looking at helping the management of the events, not just putting the creative on and then walking away. And if you look at the pitch world and what clients are asking for in their RFPs, you know, there's been a shift in the last few years where before clients would manage a lot of the on-site work themselves, but they're leaning much more heavily on the agencies nowadays to kind of complete the picture because a lot of events teams shrunk down during the pandemic. And they're not necessarily up to speed. There's a lot of new people in the teams. They're smaller than they were. The budgets maybe are smaller. And so there's a lot more reliance on those agencies to do more. So you're getting people looking around for tools to help them do that and to offer more value to their customers. from a brand perspective, people are pushing hard on cost. I think gone are the days where you can charge, $100,000 for your license for an event. I think that with the introduction of much more sort of software businesses into event tech world, rather than just like events businesses who do software, the price point is being pushed down and down and down, and people are savvy. They look at what they're spending on Microsoft Office, and they look at what they're spending on their ERP tools, on their CRMs like HubSpot, whatever they're using, and they're like, why is it that this software is costing me this every month, and then this software is costing me that every month? What doesn't fit here? And so people are challenging that. So I think that's been really interesting, and a lot of companies are having to adjust how they sell to sort of meet that much more of a sort of SaaS model. Because I think traditionally maybe event tech has been a little bit more sort of white glove as a service, a bit more of a sort of consultancy plus software sort of model. So, a lot of that sort of TLC and the white gloves has to be stripped out if the price point comes down, which is what's we're seeing.
No, it's something we're seeing across all our partners and also the event professionals we're talking with. It's people are more aware that, and obviously there's a lot of different options out there. So some want to distinguish themselves and get the price as low as possible, which then kind of forces the others to comply to that, because that also changes the expectations of the event professional. And the current state of the economy where we're in, it's quite a bit turbulent. So that also plays quite a big role, that people are kind of forced to look at cheaper options. And if you want to keep your clients, you probably have to accommodate to that, which often, as you mentioned, comes at a cost. It's less white glove. There can be less support because that is where you don't have a lot of margins. And it can come bite the event professional eventually. If you're cutting down on everything, then you might as well go with, as you mentioned, like a Teams kind of solution that is not really the most memorable experience, other than it probably has some tech issues that will stick top of mind after the event. And that's where I think eventually that will turn around, because we do see some companies that just stand their ground, and if you want to get the quality that you need, it is just going to cost you, and eventually you'll have to comply to that if you want to create the best event possible. But there's a lot happening there, and another big part of that is transparency in the pricing. During the past 4 years, every now and then you heard a story of event professionals that played around with getting quotes from a specific or a few event platforms, and in one time they phrased themselves as being a startup company, didn't have a lot of budget, wanted to do a big event. What would be a quote for that? The same person then sent out another quote to that same company, but this time they were an enterprise, and what you saw, they got two completely different quotes, which obviously is, I can understand where it comes from, but those times it's no longer possible to do that, and transparency gives people or companies a big advantage over the others, because someone who does research, it can throw them off, or most of the time it throws them off when they can't directly see what would be the cost, because in their mind, in their thought process of making a decision what software they should go for, a big part of that is, would it fit in my budget? And if they can't figure that out by just doing the research and looking at the platform, most likely they will go to another that actually shows them, obviously not the end tailored price, because there are always some variables that come to play in there in terms of what you actually need, but to give them a rough estimate so they can make a decision, would that fit my budget or not? And it also builds trust, because it's not that everything is behind a curtain, no one can see it. That does give builds more trust with the event professional as well. So that's another trend I would like to add to it, where it's not for everyone yet, but you see more and more companies opening up and being more transparent in terms of pricing, also because of that decision-making process, and because event professionals are more aware, are more affected by their current budgets. But yeah, I think you've probably seen that as well.
Yeah, big time. And I guess that, there's two things to that. There's some fear in the industry is if you're an event tech player where you're like, ooh, I better not put my pricing out because my competitors will see and they'll undercut me. There's the complexity around how those prices are put together. There's lots of variables to the overheads around running event tech for clients. And that, especially in the virtual world, there used to be a big sort of server overhead and cost for streaming and all this sort of stuff, which made it complex to put basic numbers out there. But certainly, people expect to have some kind of clear indication of what they're getting into, because they're not going to start a conversation if they knew from the beginning that it would be, 10 times more than their budget or even twice more their budget. So that's crucial. And I think from an event tech player perspective, you've got to try and be transparent, and then it's all about explaining where the value is. Like, what we always try and do is say, okay, how many hours of your time are you going to get back from using this software? If we're not saving you time, then what's the point? Because that's the one kind of crucial resource as an event manager or an event team that you have not in abundance, right, is time. So if you can say, you know what, we're going to save you X number of hours on site each day, we're going to save you a week before in the 6 months leading up to the event, you can put a number to that, and then you can say, you know what, on balance, this is actually giving us more than we would have spent doing it manually. So I think that explaining that value proposition is kind of key, and I think that's what then makes it an easier sort of decision for the brand side of things.
Absolutely. I love the value-based approach. It's so much easier than just saying like, yeah, we have so much numbers and this is what it's costing us. Like, just looking at what it actually brings in terms of value.
Yeah.
If you're not helping them save time or save cost elsewhere, why would they need you in the first place? So yeah, I love that approach, and more companies should do that.
So controversial moment, right? Data. Let's talk about data, because that is a good segue, because I've talked about time, and in my world, time is greater than data from a client perspective. But if you talk to any event tech company out there, they're always talking about data, and data is the key. You've got a data lakes, you've got, data that can drive improvement over time. Honestly, I'm not seeing from the work we've done over the years, I'm not seeing the level of benefit from having all this magical data floating around that people are harping on about. I think if I was to be controversial, I think it's more of an investor KPI for an event tech company, which is why people push on that button, than it is actually going to value event teams. Like, we've tried, a quick example, we've tried in the past pushing the data button with teams and collected all these beautiful dashboards and have all these CSVs they can export and all that sort of stuff. I think 70% of teams out there don't really look at it beyond saying, oh, that was successful, or maybe we can increase those numbers next time. I think really big companies, yeah, great. If you're doing hundreds of events every year, it makes sense. For other companies, I see the benefits more marginal. I mean, what's your take?
I think there's a lot of things that I can definitely find myself in. Biggest kind of caveat there is that, as you mentioned, like, they don't do a lot with it. Like, if you would actually utilize the data in a way that it becomes actionable, and you, for instance, with your exhibitors, like if you can show them how they can improve and get more return on investment, that is something that without those data points, it's very hard to prove to them and to give them an actionable roadmap. It would add a lot of value. to your exhibitors. You can charge more for it. They will be happier. They will their retention goes up. They'll probably come back and spend more next year. So in that sense, it can, like, data can be very valuable also for yourself to improve your event. But if you don't do anything with it, yeah, then that's a pity. And in that regards, data can also save time, because if you have, instead of you having to do all the calculations yourself, now you have a software that can actually give you the data pretty much automatically once the event ends, or even during the event. In order to do that yourself, you would have to have someone in front of the door trying to scan all the badges, or head counting in the old days, like literally write it all down. It comes back to what you say, like time is such a valuable asset. But data can also play into that. But I think the main point here is that too much event professionals still not really lack the knowledge, or it is not that they don't want to do anything with it. It's more that it is hard to understand where to start and what parts of the data you can actually use to enhance it, to add value. But also there's so much going on. It's like, for me, I'm running my own business, and one of the things that always stays behind, which is still very important, is, for instance, my financial administration. Like, it's always the last thing on my to-do list, and whatever comes on top of it, it will take a priority. And I think in some ways data is that for event professionals. There are so much things to do, like you have to plan out the next event. Yeah, we could look at the data and improve it, but we kind of have a gist of what went on because we were there. And it might be that you're missing 70% of what actually there is in terms of data, but you've had a quick look at it and you've been there, you've talked to 5 people, so I think you know everything there is to know. And then it's easy to just move on to the next event and not take the most out of that data, whilst if you would have taken half an hour, an extra hour to dive into that data and look at the full picture, next event would probably been a lot better and provided a better return on investment. You will be able to better cater your program to the attendees because you see what works and what doesn't. And it's very easy to not do it, but the moment you do it, and obviously, as you mentioned, enterprises, it will be a much bigger impact. The more events you do, the more impact it will have. But even for those smaller companies, it can make the difference between your event being profitable and not being profitable just because you looked at the data. And then in that sense, I would say data is very important, but only if you actually make it actionable, take action on it, and actually do something with it. And in all other cases, yeah, definitely. Time takes the cake.
That's it. Once you've got the time to spend on the data, then you can do some good stuff with the data. I can sense the rage of all the event profs out there and the event tech people who are like, no, data is important. So I agree, but like you say, we live in the real world, and you know that in most cases you don't have a nice week after the event finishes to get into the data and crunch the numbers and make beautiful dashboards and plan for the future. Most of the time you're on a plane and you're going to the next one.
Oh yeah.
So
absolutely.
And therein lies, I think, another good segue to talk about AI, right? So AI is really the buzzword of the last couple of years, especially with the advent of more sort of public-facing, easily accessible AI tools like GPT. Let's talk about use cases. Data crunching is like a number one use case for AI, I would say, in the events world. If I've got a big CSV full of data and I want to get some good insights out of it, then I just chuck that into GPT or some local version if I'm worried about who gets hold of that data. So obviously GPT is open and absorbing everything it learns. So, crunching some numbers, asking some natural language questions to GPTs like, hey, what are the trends you see here? What takeaways can I learn? I'm trying to understand how my meeting spaces are being used. What have you spotted? Like, that is honestly such a goldmine of really rapid insights. It does the work of a business analyst in 5 seconds flat. So, what are your thoughts? Do you agree? Have you seen any other good sort of implementations of AI for the event management pipeline?
Well, AI is obviously huge. It has a huge potential, and I do definitely agree. There's a very big, like as we just mentioned, like the biggest problem with data is not having the time to actually make sense out of all of it, and AI can do that in a heartbeat. So definitely there's a huge possibility there. It's just that if you look at currently companies, and that's another trend we're seeing definitely in 2023, is everyone has AI in some way or form. And most of that is just a simple if this then that kind of approach where yeah, it's smart. Yes, it automatically does it, but is it really AI or is it just automated intelligence instead of artificial intelligence? I think that's for me a big question. I see the potential of it, and I understand why companies use it. It's a buzzword. Everyone loves it, and they hear about the new thing. So you have that shiny object syndrome where you're like, I have to have this. And does your platform have AI? And then it would be a shame if you cannot say, we don't have AI. But now you see a lot more, you see it a lot in recommending the right session to a person, or doing the networking and meeting the right people. This is something event professionals have been doing for many years. And at first it was just by hand, like, oh, I think that person should meet with this person. Now it's a matter of you fill in your profile, you fill in what you like, and you meet people that like the same, or you fill in what you need and you find people that are looking for that. But that's literally just connecting the dots. It's not really AI. Like, otherwise that AI would have had to scan everything what I've been doing on my social media and what's in my head to really, that is, it will come in the future eventually. I believe that. But right now it's so overused by all the companies that,
yeah,
I don't know.
agree.
I think you're right that the biggest use case is in data, because there you have tools that actually can sift through everything and make sense out of it, and that is very useful. In all other cases, it's kind of you say it's AI, but is it really AI kind of approach, at least from my perspective. So you have to, as an event professional, that can also be overwhelming, because you're like, I need to have AI, and everyone has AI, but do they really have AI? No one really knows. So
That's it. And
I don't know. AI at the moment is more confusing and a buzzword rather than useful. And for that data implementation, if you look at event technology, it, as you mentioned, like most of the time you have to get all your data out, then put it into another tool like ChatGPT to make sense out of it. It's not that it's integrated in those tools yet. So that's something that a lot of tools should work on. And one of the things that I see as a huge use case for event technology or software in general, something that HubSpot has been experimenting with a little bit. It is making the back end of your software as a service a lot more approachable by just giving people a prompt. They're like, hey, I want this event and the setup needs to look like this. And then the AI quickly toggles all the settings, so you don't have to dive into every single detail on the back end. That would save a lot of time, which is, as you just mentioned, very valuable asset to have. It will make the user experience even better for an event professional. So if it can be more of an assistant to tailor a tool or tailor a software to exactly what you need, or get out the insights that you're looking for without you having to first export it and then import it to a ChatGPT, I think there's where the real use case of it, something like AI is or sits. But I haven't seen it yet really in that capacity. Maybe you've came across something or are working on something, but I've yet to see a company that really has built it as a core of their product.
Yeah, I agree. So I've seen it. I've seen it done in a couple of ways, but a much more of a sort of sandbox kind of experience. So there's Auto GPT, which is something you can install on your computer, and you can ask it to do things, and it will go off, and it's got power to open up programs on your desktop and search the web and collate data and do stuff for you, buy stuff, whatever you want. But it's in the early days, so it's you're kind of putting your life into your own hands if you're using if you're using that for a real business goal. So you never know really what it's going to do. So that's kind of coming, but I'm sure in the next 6 months, 12 months, you'll have some really concrete sort of implementations of that, which will look good. So something I've been wishing for ages is Copilot. So Microsoft obviously announced Copilot earlier in the year, and so there's a basic version in Bing Chat, which is kind of embedded in any kind of Edge browser these days. So it's basically like a ChatGPT equivalent, but a little bit more sort of research ready, I suppose, because it references sort of information it gives you. It kind of a little bit less of a black box. But what they're going to do with that is release that into PowerPoint, into Excel, into Word. So Excel in particular is going to be fantastic. Talk about the struggles of a small business owner trying to manage your books and run a business and grow at the same time. Having the power of those sort of natural language models able to take, written commands and execute stuff, things which are time consuming, but simple to do, that is going to be like a huge game changer. So from having Copilot in Excel to having a kind of Copilot equivalent in any kind of software package is the obvious next step. It's the natural thing to do. And as you say, like, one of the huge hurdles event profs have got to get over in terms of using event tech is the learning curve. There's a lot of really complicated technology out there. There's technology that's been cobbled together. It's like a chimera of different solutions through acquisition, through growth, through team member changing. So you end up with this end product which is really difficult to use, and you have to get certified to use some event tech, which is just nuts because it should be saving you time, not costing you time. So to have something where you don't have to learn it, you just ask it what you want, and it does it for you as a sort of system expert. 100% with you. That's the dream.
Yeah, the future looks bright in that regards. I think there's a lot that can happen and that people are working on that would make the life of event professionals and the businesses for event tech in general so much easier and better. And that's something that we see the first steps or a few first steps in the right direction already. And I'm looking forward to seeing what the future holds in that regards.
All right, so here's my sort of controversial take on content and AI use for content. I don't think that we're there yet in terms of, when I mean content, I talk about copywriting, I'm talking about video generation, around image generation. All the stuff has been really hyped up this year. At first it was really cool because they're like, oh wow, it's just generating stuff and I don't have to do much work and it's just appearing on screen. Isn't that amazing? But actually, once you've seen a bit of it, it kind of becomes a bit old and you sort of see the trends and it all starts to sound pretty similar. So any brand who's relying too heavily on content gen from AI, I think is not necessarily helping themselves. And I don't think in the event tech world, it's really got a place necessarily at the minute. Even software which kind of edits videos down and sort of trims things and automatically cuts stuff, it just, you still can't beat the sort of human touch at the minute, especially if you want to stand out in the market.
I have to agree to that. Some parts it gets right, but then you still have to go in and edit the parts that aren't right. And most of the time you kind of have to start from scratch because it has edited things out that you cannot redo. So you have to go to the raw footage and then edit it yourself. There is a potential for it, definitely. And I think it just is a matter of getting better, improving and taking that next step. As we said, like we are very much, although it has been around for a little while, it's very much the early days and it is getting better exponentially. in a lot of ways. So I think within a year from now, it might be different. But at this point, yeah, it has been hyped up a lot. And most of the time, you're better off doing it yourself unless you really don't have any skills and not really a quality expectation or certain standard, so to speak. You're like, as long as it's edited a little bit and it looks a bit nice, then and it saves me a lot of time. You know, it comes back to what you said, like time is such a valuable asset. So I do understand a lot of people that don't have the time to do it or don't have the skills to do it. It helps you to quickly get something up and running and to put yourself out there. And in terms of the quantity and making sure that you can put it out as fast as possible, as much as possible, it does have a use case there. But in terms of quality, if you really have a specific quality standard, quality over quantity, then at this point it's not good enough yet. But it will come there eventually. I just think the hype was a bit too early in that regard.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not about having a big internal team. You know, there's an amazing, rich and vibrant freelance market around the world. You know, there are no boundaries anymore in terms of where you hire your freelancers. And so you can get really talented people. It's not going to break the bank, who are going to do a top job on your content without having to worry about learning it yourself or doing it internally in-house. So I think that that sort of the freelance route is really where it's at for the sort of lower cost of production. You know, if you're not ready to sort of go to the next step and get an agency, a record, or a webinar company to do it for you, whatever it might be. Yeah. So just to round off the conversation then, what's your take? What are your predictions for the next 6 months? What are we going to start to see more of? Or lesser?
I think we will keep seeing consolidation in the market in terms of platforms either merging or being acquired, leaving the space. It is just still there. I like that there's a lot of options out there, but I think it's also good for the market in general to have a bit fewer options for multiple reasons. So I think I know there are a few companies still in the process of adjusting to the current climate. Doesn't mean they completely evaporate or completely disappear, but there will be a little less options, at least for the time being. And that is something I think, in general, it's a good thing for the market. It also forces companies to keep innovating and keep on point. As we quickly touched upon, in person right now is a huge focus, and I think for the next year, it will definitely be that way. I think from end of next year and onwards, we'll see a pivot back to more virtual, more really hybrid focus, and adding a virtual component to it. Many reasons for that, but the main one, obviously, the next generation and the goals that we're setting in terms of being carbon neutral. There's not a lot things that can break down or bring down your carbon emission 95%. Like a virtual event can. So those things are more long-term in the next year. I think it's more consolidation. I think AI is getting better, but it won't take over the market completely. So not a huge change compared to where 2023 brought us. I think it's kind of slowly settling into more standard, to the new standard, so to speak. Yeah. How's that for you?
I think we're going to see much more hardware coming back into the market. So if you remember event tech shows before COVID, it was all like a lot of interactive stuff. You had people playing around with lots of AV equipment, big LED walls, and interactive experiences. I think that's going to come back again big time. And I think the event tech players are going to start putting hardware into their solutions in order to really sort of nail down a bit of a point of difference and kind of own the space in sort of the in-person events world. So hardware, I think, is going to make a big resurgence, which I think is only a good thing, you know, because there was great innovation happening for that space, you know, with Raspberry Pis and Arduinos and all the cool stuff you can do with those. We were really sort of on the verge of making some really cool products. So that's going to be good. I agree. I think that the market's going to continue to consolidate. I think that there's going to be a much bigger return to value business, you know, both creating value for end users rather than investors, but also the businesses that can sort of stand on their own 2 feet without being flooded by investor money, because I just don't think it's in the same quantities as it was. Which again is only a good thing, because then you get back to the basics. You're like, okay, what's our USPs in this market? Do we have a reason to be here beyond just trying to snap up market share? You know, what are we bringing to the table? You know, have people really trying to find their product market fit again. I think it's going to be a nice, refreshing change. And I think that then, you know, tech as sort of an invisible companion in the in-person event space is going to continue to grow and develop. There's some great logistics tools out there. There's a great way you can sort of manage an experience without ever being seen by the end user. It doesn't have to be overt tech, but all of those sort of management tools, logistic tools, have a really big difference and can have a really big impact on what's being done at an event. You know, whether you're selling stuff or whether you're reducing queue times or whether you're just like greasing the wheels on getting people through a space and through an experience.
Love it. I think definitely on the hardware part, you're absolutely right. It's something we're seeing already slowly trickling back down. So yeah, looking forward to see what the next year is bringing to the event industry.
Love it. Well, listen, it's been a great chat, a great conversation. I look forward to the next one, and let's see if our predictions come true.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for your time, Nick. It was a pleasure having the conversation.
Thanks, Merijn. Take it easy.
Have a good day.